Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Seattle penthouse. It was a cold, relentless storm that perfectly mirrored the absolute dread building inside Chloe's chest. She stood frozen by the marble kitchen island. In her hand, she held a financial document that changed everything she thought she knew about her life. Her husband, Julian, was late again. He was always late these days. Tonight, however, the scent of his expensive cologne wouldn't be able to mask the stench of his lies. She was about to confront a monster disguised as a loving partner, and the consequences of this single conversation would push her into the darkest, most terrifying ordeal of her life. Chloe Bennett was the sole heir to a massive Pacific Northwest real estate empire. 2 years ago, she had been a quiet, reserved woman who preferred the company of books to high society. Then, at a vibrant rooftop party hosted by her fierce best friend Sarah, she met Julian. Julian was charismatic, impeccably dressed, and seemingly perfect. He swept her off her feet with calculated precision. Shortly after their wedding, Chloe's father passed away under sudden, mysterious circumstances. The doctors called it a rapid cardiac failure. Julian immediately stepped in to take control of Bennett Enterprises. Slowly, the loving husband vanished, replaced by a cold, arrogant corporate shark who drained the company accounts while keeping Chloe completely in the dark. But Chloe was her father's daughter. She had finally started digging into the corporate ledgers, and what she found was going to tear their pristine world apart. The front door clicked open, and Julian walked into the penthouse. He tossed his leather briefcase onto the velvet sofa with a tired sigh. He looked perfect, untouched by the Seattle rain. Chloe turned to face him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She forced her voice to remain steady. "Julian, we need to talk right now." He groaned, loosening his silk tie. "Not tonight, Chloe. I am exhausted from saving your father's failing company." Chloe did not flinch. "That is funny, because I spent the day reviewing the accounts. Tomorrow morning I am returning to the office as the primary shareholder, and I am bringing an independent auditing firm with me." The silence that followed was suffocating. The ticking of the hallway clock sounded like a judge's gavel. Julian froze entirely. The charismatic mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, revealing something dark, feral, and utterly terrified underneath. He slowly turned his head to look at her. For a long moment, Julian just stared. Then, miraculously, the tension vanished from his shoulders. He let out a soft, self-deprecating laugh and walked slowly toward her. "You know what, Chloe? You are absolutely right. I have been out of my mind with stress, and I have neglected you. I forgot that this is your legacy." He reached out and gently brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. His touch felt surprisingly cold. "Before you bring the auditors in, let us just take a breath. We need to reconnect. Let me take you on a weekend trip. Just the two of us. Up in the Cascade Mountains. I know a beautiful, isolated spot. We can talk about the future of the company there." Chloe hesitated. The sudden shift in his demeanour was jarring, but she was so desperately tired of fighting. The memory of their early romance flickered in her mind. A weekend away sounded peaceful. She nodded slowly, completely unaware that she had just agreed to a journey into her own grave. The next morning, they packed Julian's sleek black SUV. The drive out of Seattle was quiet. As they left the grey concrete of the city behind, the landscape shifted into towering, ancient pine trees and deep emerald valleys. The sky above the Cascade Mountains was a bruised purple, threatening a heavy downpour. Chloe stared out the passenger window, feeling a strange knot tightening in her stomach. Julian hummed along to the radio, his hands relaxed on the steering wheel. He seemed completely at ease, which only made Chloe feel more anxious. They drove for hours, eventually turning off the paved highway onto a rugged dirt logging road. The trees grew thicker, their massive branches blocking out the sunlight. The shadows stretched across the windshield like long, grasping fingers. "Where exactly are we going, Julian?" she asked, her voice tight. He smiled without taking his eyes off the muddy road. "A secret spot. Total privacy." "You are going to love it." The SUV finally rolled to a stop in a small, muddy clearing. There were no cabins, no hiking trails, and absolutely no cell service. Just a dense, intimidating wall of ancient forest. Julian popped the trunk and pulled out a heavy backpack and a large silver thermos. "Come on, we have to hike a little further to see the waterfall," he said, cheerfully. Chloe stepped out into the damp, freezing air. The silence of the woods was heavy and unnatural. No birds were singing. She wrapped her waterproof jacket tighter around her body and followed him into the tree line. The ground was slick with rotting leaves and wet moss. With every step, Chloe felt like they were walking further away from civilization and deeper into a trap. Julian marched ahead, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was following. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to close in around them, swallowing them whole. After a mile, her lungs burned, and her legs ached from the steep incline. "Let us take a break," Julian announced, stopping near a massive moss-covered boulder. He unscrewed the cap of the silver thermos and poured a steaming cup of dark, earthy-smelling tea. "Here, drink this. It will warm you up." Chloe took the metal cup gratefully. The cold mountain air had chilled her to the bone. She brought the cup to her lips and drank. The tea tasted strange, bitter, and overwhelmingly pungent, like burnt soil and wild mushrooms. "What is in this?" she asked, coughing slightly. Julian leaned against the boulder, his eyes locked onto hers. "Just a special herbal blend," he said softly. "A recipe I learned a long time ago." Chloe took another sip, desperate for the warmth. Almost immediately, a strange sensation washed over her. Her fingertips began to tingle, and a heavy, thick fog rolled into her mind. The trees around them seemed to sway unnaturally. The sound of the wind morphed into a low, buzzing static. "Julian, I do not feel well," Chloe whispered. The cup slipped from her numb fingers, spilling the dark liquid onto the green moss. She tried to take a step toward him, but the ground tilted violently beneath her boots. Her knees buckled, and she fell hard onto the damp earth. Julian did not rush to help her. He stood perfectly still, looking down at her, with a cold, calculating expression. "I know you do not feel well, Chloe," he said, his voice echoing strangely in her ears. "You see, your father did not feel well either." Chloe's heart slammed against her ribs. She tried to speak, to scream, but her throat was paralyzed. "What are you talking about?" she managed to slur. Julian crouched down, bringing his face agonizingly close to hers. "I am talking about the company. I spent years earning your father's trust, and he was going to leave it all to charity. So I found a very special type of wild mushroom. Undetectable. Fatal. It looks exactly like a heart attack." Tears of absolute horror welled in Chloe's eyes as the paralyzing toxin ravaged her nervous system. "You killed him!" she gasped, the world spinning wildly around her. Julian smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. "Yes, and I was going to let you live in luxury, as long as you stayed quiet and let me run the empire. But you just had to threaten an audit. You left me no choice, darling." He stood up, adjusting the collar of his expensive jacket. "In a few hours, the authorities will find your abandoned car. They will assume you wandered off and got lost. The animals out here will take care of the rest. By the time they find whatever is left of you, the toxin will have degraded completely. It is the perfect tragedy. The grieving widow loses her life in the harsh wilderness." He turned his back on her. "Goodbye, Chloe. Try not to suffer too much." He walked away, disappearing into the thick fog. Chloe lay paralyzed in the mud, darkness pulling her under as the freezing rain began to fall. The cold was the only thing keeping her tethered to consciousness. Rain battered her face, mixing with her tears. She could not move her arms or legs. Her vision was reduced to blurred shapes of grey and green. She closed her eyes, waiting for the end. Suddenly, the heavy sound of snapping branches broke the silence. A low, rhythmic panting approached. A rough, warm tongue dragged across her freezing cheek. Chloe forced her eyes open and saw the striking blue eyes of a massive Siberian husky staring down at her. A second later, a pair of heavy leather boots stepped into her field of vision. A man knelt beside her. He had a rugged, weather-beaten face, thick dark hair, and piercing green eyes. "Holy hell," he muttered, his voice deep and gravelly. Ranger, stay back! The man quickly checked her pulse, his calloused fingers warm against her freezing neck. Hold on, he whispered. I have got you. You are not going to die out here today. Strong arms scooped her off the frozen ground. Chloe felt her head loll against a broad, solid chest. The man carried her with effortless strength, moving rapidly through the treacherous forest terrain. The husky ran ahead, leading the way through the storm. Chloe drifted in and out of consciousness. She smelled wood smoke, wet fur, and pine needles. She heard the rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel. Finally, the blinding sting of bright fluorescent lights pierced her eyelids. The man burst through a set of double doors, his voice echoing down a sterile hallway. Doc! I need help out here. Found her deep in the ridge sector. She is toxic, barely breathing. Nurses swarmed around them. Chloe was lowered onto a soft hospital bed. Bright lights blinded her, and the sharp prick of an IV needle bit into her arm. As the medical team rushed to stabilize her, she caught one last glimpse of the man with the green eyes before the darkness completely swallowed her. Chloe woke up to the steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. The room smelled of sharp antiseptic and clean linens. She slowly opened her eyes. The walls were painted a faded, comforting yellow. Sitting in a chair by the window was an older man, with a thick grey beard and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a white coat over a flannel shirt. Ah, Sleeping Beauty returns to the land of the living, he said gently, standing up and walking over. I am Dr. Miller. You gave us quite a scare, young lady. You're in the Oak Haven Rural Clinic. Chloe tried to sit up, her muscles screaming in protest. What happened? She croaked. Dr. Miller poured her a cup of water. You were brought in by Caleb, our local mountain hermit. You had a massive dose of a highly toxic neurotoxin in your system, derived from a rare local fungus. If Caleb had found you 10 minutes later, you would be in a morgue. Do you remember who did this to you? The memory hit her like a freight train. Julian's cold smile, the bitter tea, the confession about her father. Chloe gripped the bedsheets, her knuckles turning white. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute rage. My husband. Dr. Miller frowned deeply, setting the water cup down. Should I call the local sheriff? Chloe shook her head frantically. No. No police yet. He is wealthy, powerful, and he knows how to manipulate the system. If he finds out I am alive, he will finish the job. I need to handle this my way. Dr. Miller sighed, running a hand through his grey hair. I do not like it. But you are the patient. What do you need? Chloe looked at the bulky landline phone sitting on the bedside table. I need to make a phone call to Seattle, to the only person in the world I can trust. Dr. Miller nodded and pushed the phone toward her. Take your time. I will make sure no one enters this room. Chloe dialed the number with shaking fingers. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar, energetic voice answered. Hello? Sarah here. Chloe swallowed hard, fighting back a sob. Sarah, it is me. There was a long, terrifying silence on the other end of the line. Who is this? Sarah's voice was suddenly sharp, defensive. This is not funny. Chloe is missing. The police are searching the mountains right now. Sarah, please, it is me, Chloe pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Julian brought me out here. He poisoned me. He killed my dad, Sarah. He left me in the woods to die. I am in a clinic in Oak Haven. I need you. I need you and Mark. A loud crash echoed through the phone, sounding like Sarah had dropped a coffee mug on a hardwood floor. Oh my God, Sarah gasped, her voice breaking. Oh my God, Chloe. We are coming. Mark and I are leaving right now. Do not talk to anyone. We will be there in 3 hours. True to her word, Sarah burst into the clinic room 3 hours later, followed closely by her husband Mark. Sarah threw her arms around Chloe, weeping uncontrollably. Mark stood by the bed, his fists clenched in quiet fury. The police called it off, Mark said, his voice thick with anger. Julian held a press conference an hour ago. He played the grieving husband perfectly, squeezed out fake tears for the cameras. They found your jacket near a steep ravine. They are preparing to declare you legally dead. They are holding a memorial service in Seattle this Friday. Chloe felt a cold, hard determination settle into her bones. The terrified victim who fell in the mud was gone. She looked at her best friend and her husband. Friday, she repeated softly. Perfect. That gives us 3 days. Mark, Sarah, I need you to help me buy a very specific outfit. If my husband wants to throw a funeral, I'm going to make sure it is a day he never forgets. Friday arrived with dreary, classic Seattle rain. The memorial service was held at an upscale modern event hall overlooking the Puget Sound. Black luxury cars lined the valet driveway. Inside, the room was filled with white lilies, soft piano music, and Seattle's corporate elite. Julian stood near the front dressed in a sharp black Italian suit, looking perfectly mournful. Beside him stood Vanessa, his director of public relations, who was also his secret mistress. She wore a black dress that was slightly too tight for a funeral. She discreetly touched Julian's arm. Once the death certificate is finalized next week, the board will officially name you CEO, she whispered, a greedy glint in her eyes. Julian nodded subtly, dabbing his dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. Just play the part today, Vanessa. Make sure the reporters get good photos of me looking devastated. Everything is finally falling perfectly into place. The piano music faded and Julian stepped up to the acrylic podium. The large crowd fell absolutely silent. He cleared his throat, gripping the edges of the podium to simulate emotional instability. Thank you all for coming today, Julian began, his voice trembling masterfully. Chloe was my light. She was the heart of Bennett Enterprises and the love of my life. To lose her so suddenly, so tragically to the unforgiving mountains, it is a pain I cannot describe. He paused, letting a single tear fall down his cheek. The audience murmured in deep sympathy. I only wish I could have held her hand one last time. I wish I could have looked into her beautiful eyes and told her how much she meant to me. The room was heavy with fabricated grief. Julian took a deep breath, preparing to deliver his final, heart-wrenching line. But before he could speak, the heavy oak double doors at the back of the memorial hall slammed open with a deafening crack. The entire room turned to look. Standing in the doorway, framed by the gloomy grey light of the Seattle storm, was Chloe. She was not wearing a shroud or a hospital gown. She was dressed in a stunning, blood-red designer trench coat, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked like an absolute queen of vengeance. 2 Seattle police detectives flanked her, alongside a fiercely glaring Mark. The silence in the room was so profound it felt like a vacuum. Someone in the second row dropped a champagne glass. It shattered loudly against the hardwood floor. Chloe began to walk slowly down the centre aisle. Her high heels clicked rhythmically against the wood, sounding like a ticking time bomb. She locked her eyes directly onto Julian. His face drained of all colour, turning a sickening shade of ash grey. He stumbled backward, knocking the microphone stand over with a loud screech of feedback. "Hello, darling," Chloe said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "Did you miss me?" Chloe asked, stopping 10 feet from the podium. "You said you wanted to look into my eyes one last time." "Well, here I am." Julian's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. He looked frantically at the exits, but uniform officers were already stepping inside, blocking the doors. Vanessa, realizing her golden ticket was evaporating, tried to quickly slip away through a side door. She did not make it far. Sarah stepped directly into her path. "Going somewhere?" Sarah hissed. Vanessa sneered. "Move out of my way, you pathetic!" Before Vanessa could finish the sentence, Sarah drove a perfectly executed right hook directly into Vanessa's nose. A loud crunch echoed in the hall. Vanessa shrieked, collapsing to the floor and clutching her bleeding face. Sarah shook out her hand, stepping over the weeping mistress. "Never disrespect my best friend again," Sarah muttered, adjusting her black blazer. At the front of the room, Julian's polished facade completely shattered. Panic overtook logic. He lunged forward, grabbing a silver letter opener from the memorial guestbook table. He grabbed the nearest person, a terrified catering waiter, and held the dull blade to the boy's neck. "Stay back!" Julian screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "I will kill him! I swear to God I will!" The detectives drew their weapons, shouting commands. Chloe did not retreat. She felt no fear, only absolute disgust for the pathetic creature before her. She took 2 calm steps forward. Julian was so focused on the police that he didn't track her movement. With lightning speed, Chloe lifted her leg and drove the razor-sharp stiletto heel of her designer shoe straight down into the top of Julian's leather-clad foot. The heel pierced the leather and drove deep into the bone. Julian released a blood-curdling howl of agony, dropping the waiter and collapsing. In an instant, the detectives swarmed him. Julian was slammed onto the hardwood floor, his hands wrenched behind his back. The cold click of metal handcuffs echoed over the gasps of the shocked corporate elite. Julian sobbed pathetic, messy tears as they hauled him to his feet. "You are crazy," he screamed at Chloe. "You cannot prove anything." Chloe simply smiled, pulling a small digital recorder from her red coat pocket. "Actually," Caleb went back to the clearing. "He found the thermos you left behind. The lab isolated the neurotoxin, Julian. The game is over. You are going to rot in a federal cell for what you did to my father. And to me." The police dragged a blubbering Julian and a bleeding Vanessa out of the hall. The attendees stood in stunned silence. Chloe turned to face her father's board of directors. "The memorial is cancelled," she announced coldly. "There is a board meeting in my office at 8 a.m. Monday. Do not be late." Over the next 3 months, Chloe reclaimed her life. She purged the company of Julian's corrupt executives, restabilized the finances, and secured her father's legacy. Julian was denied bail and faced consecutive life sentences. Everything seemed to be returning to normal. Then, on a rainy Tuesday night, Chloe's phone rang. It was 3 a.m. The caller ID showed a Seattle hospital. Chloe's blood ran cold. She answered the phone with a trembling hand. "Hello," she whispered. "Miss Bennett? This is Seattle General Hospital. You are listed as the emergency contact for Sarah and Mark Davis. There has been a severe traffic collision. A drunk driver ran a red light. You need to come immediately." The phone slipped from Chloe's grasp, clattering onto the hardwood floor. The nightmare was not over. It had simply changed shape. She grabbed her keys and ran out into the pouring rain. The emergency room was a chaotic blur of flashing lights, shouting medical staff, and the metallic scent of blood. Chloe sprinted to the front desk, demanding information. A weary trauma surgeon in bloody scrubs walked out to meet her. His grim expression told her everything she needed to know before he even opened his mouth. "I am so sorry, Ms. Bennett," the surgeon said softly. "Mark died on impact." There was nothing the paramedics could do. Chloe felt her knees buckle, the walls of the hospital spinning. "And Sarah," she choked out, terrified of the answer. "She is in surgery right now," the doctor replied. "She has suffered massive internal trauma and catastrophic spinal injuries. We are doing everything we can, but you need to prepare yourself." The next 12 hours were a blur of agonizing waiting. Chloe sat in a hard plastic chair, staring at the white wall, praying to a God she had not spoken to in years, begging for her best friend's life. When the surgeon finally emerged again, the news was a devastating mix of miracles and tragedies. Sarah had survived the surgery, but the damage was irreversible. The lower vertebrae in her spine were completely crushed. The surgeon looked Chloe in the eyes, delivering the final blow. "The nerve damage is extensive. Sarah will never walk again." Furthermore, the trauma was too severe. She lost the pregnancy. She was 8 weeks along. Chloe collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. The grief was a physical weight, crushing her chest. When Sarah finally woke up days later, Chloe had to be the one to break the news. Sarah did not scream. She did not cry. She simply turned her head to look out the hospital window, her eyes blank, her spirit entirely shattered. The fiery, vibrant woman who had punched her mistress in the face was gone, replaced by an empty, hollow shell. 6 months passed. Chloe moved Sarah into her penthouse, hiring the best physical therapists and nurses in the Pacific Northwest. But money could not buy the will to live. Sarah refused to participate in her therapy. She refused to sit in her custom wheelchair. She spent her days lying in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, wasting away. Chloe was desperate. She watched her best friend slowly dying of a broken heart. Late one night, unable to sleep, Chloe remembered her time in the Oak Haven clinic. She remembered Dr. Miller talking about the local mountain hermit, but he had also mentioned an older man, an indigenous elder named Elias who lived deep off the grid. The locals whispered that Elias possessed old knowledge, ancient botanical medicine that modern science had forgotten. Dr. Miller had called it nonsense, but Chloe had survived a neurotoxin thanks to the mountains. She decided to risk everything on a mountain legend. The next morning, Chloe packed her SUV. Sarah. "I am going out for a few days," Chloe told her friend softly. "The nurse will be here." Sarah didn't even blink. Chloe drove back into the Cascade Mountains. The scenery that had once terrified her now felt like a desperate beacon of hope. She reached the small town of Oak Haven and stopped at the local diner for directions. The locals clammed up when she mentioned Elias. Finally, an old waitress gave her a hand-drawn map on a napkin. "You will not get a car up there, honey," the waitress warned. "The road washed out 10 years ago. It is a grueling hike." Chloe did not care. She drove her SUV as far up the crumbling mountain road as she could until the tires spun out in deep mud. She parked the car, grabbed her hiking backpack, and began the brutal trek up the mountain. It was raining and the cold seeped into her bones, but the thought of Sarah's empty eyes pushed her forward. After 3 hours of grueling climbing, Chloe slipped on a slick rock, tumbling hard into a patch of thorns. She let out a frustrated cry, bleeding and exhausted. Suddenly, a familiar, deep bark echoed through the trees. A massive Siberian husky bounded through the brush, tail wagging frantically. "Ranger!" Chloe gasped. Behind the dog, stepping out from the shadows of the ancient pines, was Caleb. He wore a heavy wool jacket and carried a hunting rifle slung over his shoulder. He looked at her with wide, shocked, green eyes. "Seattle?" he asked, his voice rough. "What the hell are you doing back out here? You trying to get yourself killed again?" Chloe scrambled to her feet, wiping mud from her face. "Caleb! I need your help. I need to find Elias. My best friend is dying inside." Caleb studied her desperate face for a long moment. He sighed, adjusting his rifle. "Follow me. Keep close." Caleb led her off the main trail, navigating a hidden path through dense blackberry bushes and towering ferns. They walked in comfortable silence until the trees broke, revealing a hidden valley. Nestled by a crystal-clear mountain stream was a hand-built log cabin, with smoke curling from a stone chimney. An elderly man with long white hair and weathered deep-set eyes sat on the porch carving a piece of cedar. "This is Elias," Caleb said quietly. Elias looked up, his gaze piercing right through Chloe. "You carry a heavy sorrow, city girl," Elias said, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "But it is not your own." Chloe dropped her backpack and explained everything. Mark's death, the paralysis, the loss of the baby, Sarah's total surrender. Elias listened in absolute silence. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Bring her to me. She must stay here for one full moon cycle. No city medicine, only the mountain." Getting Sarah to the cabin was a logistical nightmare. Chloe hired a private medical transport to get them to the mudline. From there, Sarah fought them bitterly. "I am not going into the woods. Just let me die in peace," she screamed. But Caleb was already there. He brought a specialized, rugged stretcher attached to an ATV. He ignored Sarah's insults. He simply scooped her frail body up with incredible gentleness, wrapped her in thick thermal blankets, and strapped her in. "You can yell at me all you want, Sarah," Caleb said softly, looking into her angry eyes. "But we are not leaving you behind." The journey up the mountain was slow and tense. When they finally arrived, Elias immediately went to work. He applied strange, pungent poultices to Sarah's spine, brewed bitter teas from mountain roots, and forced her to breathe in the vapours of boiling pine needles. Chloe stayed in Caleb's small cabin across the valley to give them space. During that month, Chloe and Caleb fell into a quiet, profound rhythm. They chopped wood together, fished in the freezing mountain streams, and sat by the fire at night. One evening, sitting on the porch looking at the brilliant expanse of stars, Caleb finally spoke of his past. "I was a search and rescue pilot in the military," he murmured, staring into the flames. "My unit went down in a storm. I was the only one who walked out of the mountains. I came out here because I could not face the noise of the world anymore." Chloe reached out her soft, manicured hand, covering his rough, calloused one. "You saved my life, Caleb. You gave me a second chance. Maybe it is time you give yourself one." Caleb looked at her, his green eyes reflecting the firelight. He turned his hand over, intertwining his fingers with hers. The silence between them was no longer heavy with grief, but filled with a quiet, fragile hope. 4 weeks later, Chloe and Caleb walked to Elias's cabin. The door was open. Inside, Sarah was sitting up in a wooden rocking chair. She looked different. Her cheeks had colour, her eyes held a fierce spark, and she was arguing loudly with Elias about the taste of his tea. "You are a stubborn old goat," Sarah laughed. Elias chuckled, a sound like dry leaves. "And you are a noisy bird. Look who is here." Sarah turned to look at Chloe. Tears instantly sprang to Sarah's eyes. Chloe rushed forward, hugging her friend tight. Then Sarah pulled back. "Watch this," she whispered. With Elias holding one arm and Caleb supporting her waist, Sarah gritted her teeth. The muscles in her legs shook violently. Slowly, agonizingly, she pushed herself up from the chair. She stood on her own 2 feet for 3 seconds before collapsing back, exhausted but beaming. "It is coming back, Chloe. The feeling is coming back." 6 months later, the Seattle skyline gleamed outside the windows of Bennett Enterprises. Chloe sat at the head of the boardroom table, a brilliant, confident CEO. Sarah, leaning on an elegant silver cane, stood by her side as her new vice president. They had survived the fire and come out forged in steel. After the meeting, Chloe took the private elevator down to the lobby. The doors opened, and standing there, looking incredibly uncomfortable in a tailored suit, was Caleb. He had a bouquet of wild mountain wildflowers in his hand. "I am taking you back to the mountains this weekend," he said, pulling her into a tight embrace. "The city is too loud." Chloe laughed, kissing him deeply in front of the reception desk. "I will follow you anywhere," she whispered. The nightmare was truly over. The scars remained, but they were no longer wounds. They were proof of survival. Proof that even in the darkest woods, light eventually breaks through the trees. The darkness of betrayal can either bury us or plant the seeds for our greatest rebirth. Chloe and Sarah lost everything they thought they knew, only to discover a strength they never realized they possessed. Sometimes the monsters we face wear tailored suits and charming smiles, and the angels who save us live deep in the rugged wilderness. Thank you so much for listening to this incredible story of survival and justice. If Chloe and Sarah's resilience inspired you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a thrilling tale. Now, I want to hear from you. If you found out your partner was plotting against you, how far would you go to get revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.